Hey, and welcome back. Now, if you know anything about me or have been following my channel for a while, you know that I'm a big console gamer with a little bit of dabbling into PC gaming with like PC gaming rigs, as well as like a gaming laptop that I have, and most recently with the Steam Deck. But one thing I want to discuss is arcades, and specifically Arcade1up machines, as you can see here. Now I've got what I feel are the core franchises of which I've grown up and played, and that of course is Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter 2. Mortal Kombat was one of my older brother's favorite machines that he used to play at one of our local clubs in our hometown. It was something that they had one or two of these arcades, and they had a Mortal Kombat 2 arcade. So I've played arcades there as well as other places like bowling alleys and whatnot. But one of the things that's always piqued my curiosity is whether or not we would see Arcade1up themselves expand to include Nintendo arcades. Because yes, of course, Nintendo did create arcade machines, and that's actually what their first foray into gaming was, all the way back into 1973. So join me here as I discuss the arcades themselves, as well as what it would look like with a potential Nintendo and Arcade1up collaboration.
As mentioned, Nintendo's first foray into gaming, beyond card games and toys, was with the release of the Laser Clay shooting system. This was a game that used a projector and a rifle with an AR sensor to determine whether or not the player hit a target. In 1979, Nintendo released Sheriff, an arcade cabinet in the most traditional sense. The Sheriff character itself may look familiar to some eagle-eyed Smash Bros. Fans, as it's an assist trophy in that series. While Sheriff did moderately well in sales, it was nothing compared to the success that Nintendo had with Donkey Kong. Released in 1981 and developed by Shigeru Miyamoto and Gunpei Yokoi, it not only sold over 60,000 machines in the US alone, and totaled over $280 million within a 2-year time frame. This not only led to its sequel, Donkey Kong Jr., as well as Mario Bros. After that, but it also allowed Nintendo to develop their home console, the Famicom, which in the US we know as the Nintendo Entertainment System. This new system allowed Nintendo to shift gears to develop games for this console, but they never forgot their arcade roots. In this vein, they created the Versus system, an arcade console that ran Nintendo titles with a near identical chipset to the Famicom. Changes to this chipset include some of the video chips and PPUs, as well as special considerations done to prevent game piracy. These series of games ran from 1984 to 1990 and included titles like Super Mario Bros., Duck Hunt, Dr. Mario, Castlevania, and more. While many of the titles looked and played very similar to its NES counterparts, one change that was made was in the difficulty. To help owners munch customers' quarters more often, many of these titles were modified to ramp up the difficulty. Versus Castlevania, for example, saw Simon Belmont take much more damage when getting hit by enemies. Versus Super Mario Bros. Saw a number of changes to level design, perhaps to help fake out players who may have been familiar with the levels when playing on their NES consoles at home. During development of this title specifically, Miyamoto had such a great time making these changes that he worked to create a much harder modification to the game. We know this as the Japanese version of Super Mario Bros. 2. Even in the Nintendo 64 era and beyond, Nintendo still had a presence in arcades. They worked with Midway to publish the racing titles of Cruisin' USA, World, and Exotica. I personally remember playing a Cruisin' World quite a bit in the arcades, and noted it looked a lot better than its N64 counterpart. Continuing to work with third-party publishers like Sega and Namco to release other racing games like F-Zero AX, Mario Kart Arcade GP 1 and 2, and Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games in 2016 and 2020, Nintendo continued to see arcade presence. I actually hadn't seen any of these latter titles until I went to the Galloping Ghost Arcade in Brookfield, Illinois, about a year or so ago. While I'm not officially sponsored by them, I had to give them a shout out, as they offer unlimited play to to their hundreds of arcade cabinets if you pay a fee at the door. If you're in the Chicagoland area and you like arcades and video gaming, I highly recommend checking them out. Any fan of both arcade and console gaming generally knows there's a rough separation between both. As years have gone by though, this line has blurred, thanks in part to console gaming being able to run arcade games just as well, roughly around the early to mid-90s. Many individuals like myself have a soft spot for arcade gaming. Those of us on a budget often buy arcade collections of games on our console of choice. Those with no budget often emulate. And those with a lot of money and space can just buy entire arcade cabinets and place them in their game rooms, man caves, or basement bars. One company has sought to bridge the gap between budget and premium arcade gamers, Arcade1up. They work with gaming companies like Namco, Sega, Capcom, WB Games, and even Nickelodeon to release 3/4 scale arcade units of games like Pac-Man, Golden Axe, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, and the TMNT games. Somewhat recently, they've managed to acquire the grail of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 as well. Yet out of all the companies that Arcade1up has collabed with, they've yet to do one with Nintendo. And it's not like Arcade1up hasn't been trying either. In 2020, marketing director David McIntosh has said, "We've been trying to get Nintendo for the longest time, so if you have any connections over there, you let us know. But for us, it's just been like we want to do Nintendo. There's no reason not to. We have, I think it's 8 or 9, I think it's 9 out of 10 of the top arcade games of all time. And the 10th is the one we don't have, which is under Nintendo's IP. So that's been the one we've been really looking out for. The rest of them, we either have secured the rights for and it's on its way, or we've already done in the past all but Nintendo at this point." Now, I should point out, we as fans are not without our own ability to literally furbish our own Nintendo-style arcade cabinets. There have been efforts not only to mod existing Arcade1up machines to allow Nintendo games and more to be played, there are individuals and small companies that can set up like a Raspberry Pi to play any all games of your choice via emulation, and even build you a custom arcade cabinet to surround it. While the legality of this type of gameplay is questionable, there are legal options, such as the Dream Arcades available online. For more than the cost of an Apple Vision Pro, it'll net you one of these cabinets and hundreds upon hundreds of games preloaded, all of which have been licensed games. But no Donkey Kong, no Mario, no Nintendo whatsoever. Going back to Arcade1up, this had me think, what if they and Nintendo actually announced a collaboration together? What would the first collab look like? In my opinion, the arcade cabinet itself needs to have a design that looks exactly like their first booming seller and most renowned arcade title, Donkey Kong. Not only would it include that game, it should also have Donkey Kong Jr. and Mario Bros. As well. Honestly though, I could see Nintendo cheaping out on this first unit and only include these 3 titles, and or maybe add in Donkey Kong 3 as well. In a perfect world, it would include at least 12 games, not only the 4 I just mentioned, but also like Sheriff, Popeye, Punch-Out, and Super Punch-Out. The last titles, and even those like Punch-Out, need to be able to be accommodated within the hardware of the cabinet itself. To that end, that would make a game like Laser Clay Shooting System nigh impossible to include within this same type of cabinet. And of course I mentioned like 12 titles in one of these arcade cabinets because Arcade1up has worked with other video game companies and developers to offer that many titles in a single Arcade1up cabinet. The next cabinet, though, should then focus on the Nintendo Versus series of games. Many of these are titles that are currently available on the Nintendo eShop via the Switch, so there's no issues with getting the original arcade versions of the games and implementing them within a cabinet. I'd love to see not only Nintendo's support, but other third-party companies as well. This would allow us to get Versus Super Mario Bros., Castlevania, Tetris, and Dr. Mario, as well as other Nintendo early classics like Balloon Fight, Excite Bike, Pinball, and Clu Clu Land. What can I say? I've got a soft spot for that last title. Arcade1up has done a great job of working with companies like Sega and Namco to produce cabinets to support their respective racing series like Outrun and Ridge Racer. To that end, they could work with Nintendo and create a cabinet that would include their Cruisin' series, F-Zero AX, and their arcade Mario Kart games. I honestly believe this last series would be the one that I could see Nintendo deeming the most lucrative. The ridiculously high number of copies of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe sold on the Nintendo Switch speaks to the series' popularity, and you'd think Nintendo would jump at the chance to be able to allow those who've never played these arcade games do so at home. And heck, you can play Mario Kart on your cell phone via Mario Kart Tour, and in real life with Mario Kart Home Circuit, why not have it in its arcade form? One reason that could prevent Nintendo from this collaboration in its entirety, beyond internal discussions between them and Arcade1up on rights and profit sharing, would be piracy. As many people know, Nintendo is extremely fierce in protecting their games and IPs, both old and current. Seeing these released outside of their primary active consoles is not often done, although the Mini NES and SNES sort of flies in the face of this. As mentioned previously, many of these Arcade1up units have been modded by their owners to add games not normally shipped with the unit themselves. It would take Arcade1up doing additional measures to ensure these units cannot be unlocked or modified in any way to assuage Nintendo's fears. Yeah, and I get the irony that a company fighting to protect its games so hard can see its earliest model of the Switch's security features be defeated by a lowly paperclip. Regardless, Nintendo is fierce in the courtroom, as many people who F around and find out know.
So those are my thoughts with having a Nintendo and Arcade1up collaboration. Now, it's honestly, again, not very likely because Nintendo pretty much prefers to have their own hardware as well as their own preferences in working with companies that they have had a long history with, as well as are often localized in Japan as well. So that doesn't bode well for a company like Arcade1up. But in a perfect world and dream scenario, as mentioned before, those are all the examples that I'd love to see with having an Arcade1up cabinet that would include Nintendo titles on it, or multiple Arcade1up cabinets that were collaborated with Nintendo. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments section below if, let's say there was the Nintendo and Arcade1up collab, what titles you'd like to see on a cabinet, as well as how it would look and whatnot. And also please remember to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. Thanks for watching again, I really appreciate it. And make sure again to check out any other videos that I have on my channel if that strikes your fancy. Thanks again and have a great day.